In the North African town of Tagaste, around the year 331, a girl named Monica was born into a Christian household, quietly rooted within the vast and restless Roman Empire. Few who watched her childhood could have imagined the silent spiritual struggle her future home would contain. Tagaste was a provincial town of dusty streets, olive groves, and Roman customs deeply woven into daily life. Faith lived there too, but often quietly, hidden behind household walls where tradition, temper, and family authority ruled more loudly than prayer. From an early age, Monica learned discipline and restraint under the careful guidance of an older servant who trained the children of the house. The lesson repeated to her again and again was simple yet difficult. Self-control is stronger than anger. But Roman society did not ask young girls what future they desired. Marriage was a family decision, a practical arrangement meant to secure alliances and stability. When Monica was still very young, that decision was made for her. The man chosen for her was Patricius, a Roman official and a pagan. He was respected in the town, ambitious in his work, and known for a temper that could rise suddenly like a storm over the North African hills. Patricius was not the only storm inside the house Monica entered. His mother lived with them as well, and she shared the same fierce temper that ruled her son. The household Monica stepped into was one where anger often spoke first. Monica brought something unfamiliar into that home: quiet Christian faith. She did not preach loudly or challenge the authority of her husband. Instead, she carried her belief like a hidden lamp, small yet steady in a house often darkened by tension. What began in that household was not a quick battle of arguments, but a long and silent struggle of character. Years would pass before anyone understood that the most powerful force inside that turbulent home was not anger, but patience. In the customs of the Roman world, a daughter's future was rarely shaped by her own wishes. Families arranged marriages carefully, weighing reputation, alliances, and stability. When Monica reached marriageable age in Tagaste, her family made such a decision for her life. The man chosen was Patricius, a Roman citizen of some standing in the town. He served in local administration and carried the confidence of a man determined to rise within the structures of the empire that governed North Africa. Yet Patricius was also known for a fierce temper. Those who knew him understood that his anger could rise suddenly and violently. It was a trait inherited from his own household, where harsh words and quick rage had long been common. More troubling for Monica was that Patricius remained devoted to the pagan traditions of Rome. The household gods, the customs of sacrifice, and the expectations of Roman religion formed the spiritual atmosphere into which the young Christian woman was about to enter. The marriage was arranged without hostility, but without deep understanding either. Monica entered the union not with romantic hopes, but with a quiet sense of duty. She knew her life was now bound to a man who did not share her faith. Soon after the marriage, Monica discovered that Patricius's mother lived within the same home. Like her son, she possessed a strong and often volatile character. The young bride suddenly found herself surrounded by two powerful personalities. In many Roman homes, such tensions would have quickly turned into open conflict. But Monica chose a different path. She did not answer anger with anger. Instead, she learned to watch, listen, and hold her peace, even when provoked. What began as an arranged marriage in the town of Tagaste slowly became the setting of a deeper struggle. Inside that household, faith, temper, pride, and patience would collide for years before their meaning could be fully understood. Life inside Patricius' household quickly revealed its hidden tensions. The house in Tagaste was orderly in appearance, yet beneath its walls emotions often rose like sudden desert winds. For the young Monica, marriage did not bring calm stability, but a daily test of patience. At the center of much of this tension stood Patricius's mother. She possessed a commanding presence in the home and had long been accustomed to authority. Her temper, sharpened by age and habit, could flare without warning over the smallest matters. The older woman viewed Monica with suspicion from the beginning. The young bride's quiet Christian practices felt strange in a household shaped by Roman pagan customs. Even small acts of devotion could become silent points of friction within the family. Arguments in the house rarely erupted into constant shouting, but the atmosphere was heavy with tension. Words spoken in irritation, glances filled with disapproval, and sudden bursts of anger created an environment where peace seemed fragile and easily broken. Many women in such circumstances would have answered harshness with equal force. Roman society often accepted heated conflict within households, but Monica chose a different path, one that seemed weaker to some but required a deeper kind of strength. She listened when criticized, remained calm when provoked, and answered sharp words with restraint. Her silence was not surrender, nor was it fear. It was a deliberate discipline shaped by the quiet convictions of her Christian faith. Over time, something unexpected began to happen. The very patience that had first appeared as weakness slowly unsettled the anger surrounding her. Monica's steady composure made the storms of the household appear louder, harsher, and increasingly unjustified. Inside that turbulent home, an invisible struggle was unfolding. It was not a battle of arguments or authority, but of character. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the quiet strength Monica carried began to alter the atmosphere of the house itself. Patricius was known throughout Tagaste as a capable man, energetic in public affairs and proud of his Roman identity. Yet inside his home, another side often appeared. His temper could ignite suddenly, like dry wood catching fire under the relentless African sun. Small disagreements were sometimes enough to awaken that storm. A misplaced word, a delayed answer, or a simple domestic mistake could provoke sharp outbursts. The house that should have been a place of refuge often trembled under the force of Patricius's anger. Neighbors in Tagaste knew the pattern well. Many households endured similar tensions, and it was common for anger to dominate family life. In such an environment, confrontation often produced louder confrontation, and harsh words returned again and again like echoing thunder. But Monica refused to enter that cycle. When Patricia's voice rose, she did not answer with equal force. Instead, she waited. She listened. She allowed the storm to pass without feeding it, holding her words as carefully as one might guard a fragile flame. Her restraint puzzled many around her. Some women in the town asked how she tolerated such behavior. Others believed silence meant weakness. Yet Monica understood something deeper. Anger often grows stronger when it finds resistance, but loses power when it finds patience. In the quiet moments that followed each outburst, Monica turned inward to prayer. She asked not only for the strength to endure, but also for the wisdom to respond with a spirit that might soften the hardened atmosphere of the house. Gradually, Patricius began to notice the difference. His anger found no mirror in her face. Instead of argument, he encountered composure. Instead of retaliation, he saw a calm presence that refused to become another weapon inside the conflict. Thus, the struggle inside the house continued. but its nature slowly changed. Patricius brought the fire of his temper, yet Monica answered with a strategy far quieter and far more enduring. The patient strength of a faith that did not need to shout. When the house finally fell silent after the storms of the day, Monica often remained awake. In the dim quiet of the evening, when anger had burned itself out and the household slept, she turned her thoughts toward the God whose presence she carried quietly within her heart. Her faith was not displayed in loud declarations. In a pagan household, such gestures would only provoke more conflict. Instead, Monica practiced a form of devotion that few could see, whispered prayers, quiet reflections, and a steady trust that God worked even within hidden places. Sometimes she prayed while tending the small tasks of the home, grinding grain or preparing the evening meal. Sometimes she prayed in silence before sleep. The rhythm of her faith blended naturally into the ordinary movements of daily life. Those who lived around her rarely noticed these moments. To them, she appeared simply patient, unusually calm under pressure. Yet within that calm lived a persistent conversation with God, a plea repeated again and again for peace within her troubled home. Monica did not ask for dramatic signs or sudden miracles. Her prayers were simpler and more patient. She asked for the strength to endure, for wisdom to respond without bitterness, and for the slow transformation of hearts hardened by anger and pride. In time, her quiet faith became its own form of witness. Servants in the house noticed how she refused to answer insult with insult. Neighbors observed how conflict rarely followed her presence. Something about her conduct seemed to disarm hostility. This silent testimony carried more power than arguments ever could. Words might have provoked resistance, but patience created curiosity. People began to wonder what kind of belief could produce such steadiness in the face of continual tension. Thus, the hidden prayers of Monica slowly shaped the atmosphere around her. Though no one heard those quiet conversations with God, their influence began to spread through the household like a gentle light, barely visible yet, steadily pushing back the shadows. As the years passed, the household in Tagaste began to change. The quiet rooms that had once echoed mainly with tension and argument slowly filled with new voices. Monica gave birth to her children, and with them came both joy and a deeper layer of responsibility. Among those children was Augustine, a boy whose sharp mind and restless curiosity quickly revealed themselves. From his earliest years, he seemed unusually perceptive, absorbing the moods of the household as easily as he absorbed the lessons of language and thought. Yet the home in which these children grew was far from peaceful. Two worlds existed under the same roof. Monica carried the quiet convictions of Christian faith, while Patricius remained firmly rooted in the traditions and ambitions of Roman pagan life. This difference did not always erupt into open arguments, but it created a constant tension beneath daily routines. The children watched their parents carefully, sensing the unspoken divide between their mother's quiet devotion and their father's skeptical distance from her beliefs. Monica longed to guide her children toward baptism and the life of the church. But in Roman law and custom, the authority of the father ruled the household. Patricius alone held the final say over the religious direction of the family. At times, this authority created painful moments for Monica. When illness once threatened young Augustine, she begged Patricius to allow the boy to be baptized. For a brief moment, he agreed, but when the child recovered, he withdrew his permission. Such decisions weighed heavily on Monica's heart. She feared not only for her husband's soul, but also for the spiritual path her children might follow. The home that should have nurtured their faith instead became a place of quiet uncertainty. Thus, the birth of the children brought both hope and deeper struggle into Monica's life. Within that divided house, she now carried an even greater burden: the desire to protect the future of her family, while patiently waiting for hearts that had not yet changed. As the years unfolded in Tagaste, the quiet reality of Monica's life became clearer. In a house filled with strong personalities, Roman customs, and restless ambitions, her Christian faith stood almost entirely alone, like a single lamp burning in a vast and shadowed hall. Patricius remained devoted to the religious traditions of Rome. The rituals of the household gods and the expectations of civic life shaped his worldview. To him, Monica's faith was tolerated, but it remained something distant, private, and largely misunderstood. Within the walls of their home, Monica had no community to strengthen her spirit. No shared prayers rose from the household. No voices joined her in the quiet rhythm of Christian devotion. Her faith was carried silently, supported only by conviction and perseverance. This loneliness weighed heavily on her heart. Faith is often strengthened in fellowship, yet Monica walked a path that few around her could understand. The beliefs that shaped her deepest hopes remained invisible to those who lived closest beside her. Even her children grew up between two worlds. They saw their mother's quiet devotion, but also their father's indifference to it. In such an environment, certainty was fragile, and the direction their hearts would ultimately follow remained uncertain. Still, Monica refused to surrender to discouragement. She believed that faith did not always grow in comfortable soil. Sometimes it had to take root in difficult places, surviving storms of doubt, misunderstanding, and the slow erosion of patience. Her prayers continued, often more fervent than before. She asked not only for strength to endure her isolation, but also for the quiet transformation of the household around her, a change that might come slowly, almost invisibly, through time. In that house where her faith seemed alone, Monica held firmly to hope. She believed that God was not absent from difficult homes. Even in silence and loneliness, divine grace could be quietly at work, preparing changes no one yet imagined. To understand the tension within Monica's home, one must understand the world that shaped Patricius. He lived as a Roman citizen in North Africa, proud of the empire's traditions and deeply formed by a culture where honor, ambition, and public reputation guided a man's life. Religion in that Roman world did not resemble Monica's quiet Christian devotion. It was woven into civic rituals, festivals, and public loyalty to the gods, believed to guard the stability of the empire. Faith was less about personal transformation and more about maintaining harmony with divine powers. Patricius followed these customs without much hesitation. Offerings to household gods, participation in public celebrations, and respect for Roman religious expectations were simply part of the life he had inherited from generations before him. To him, Christianity appeared strange and even impractical. Its call to humility, forgiveness, and patient endurance did not easily fit within a society that admired strength, authority, and visible success. This difference created a quiet but constant distance between husband and wife. Monica's faith pointed toward a kingdom not built by Roman power, while Patricius remained firmly rooted in the ambitions and traditions of the empire. Yet Patricius was not a cruel man by intention. Like many Romans of his time, he simply lived within the worldview he had always known. His temper, his beliefs, and his habits were all shaped by a culture older than his marriage. For Monica, this reality made her struggle even more complex. She was not only living with an angry husband, but with a man whose entire understanding of life and faith stood far from her own deepest convictions. Thus, their home became a meeting place of two worlds. One was the confident civilization of Rome, proud and ancient. The other was the quiet and growing faith of Christianity, still small but carrying within it a different vision of the human heart. Over time, the life Monica lived inside her difficult home began to attract attention beyond its walls. In the narrow streets and shaded courtyards of Tagaste, neighbors observed her calm demeanor and the unusual patience she displayed amid tensions others knew well. Word traveled quietly through conversations between women drawing water, merchants exchanging greetings, and families gathering in the evening air. People spoke of Monica not with dramatic praise, but with a growing respect for her composure and steady character. Many in the town were familiar with Patricius's temper. They had seen his sudden bursts of anger and understood the weight such a personality could place upon a household. Yet they rarely saw Monica respond with bitterness or public complaint. Instead, she carried herself with a dignity that seemed unshaken by the turbulence around her. Her calm responses and measured words slowly formed a reputation that spread gently through the community, like a quiet current beneath the ordinary flow of daily life. Some women came to her seeking advice, wondering how she managed the difficulties of her marriage without surrendering to despair. Monica did not speak with dramatic authority. She simply shared the small disciplines that shaped her life: patience, restraint, and prayer. Even those who did not share her Christian faith sensed that something within her was different. Her presence seemed to soften arguments and calm tense conversations, as though her composure carried a hidden influence that steadied the atmosphere around her. Gradually, the same quiet strength that puzzled Patricius inside the home began to shape how the town itself viewed Monica. She was not known for wealth or social power, but for a character that remained balanced even in difficult circumstances. In this way, Monica's witness expanded beyond the walls of her household. Without speeches or public gestures, her life itself became a testimony, a living example that patience, when carried faithfully, could speak more powerfully than the loudest words. Within the household of Patricius, the tension between Monica and her mother-in-law had once seemed unavoidable. The older woman ruled the home with sharp authority, accustomed to obedience and quick to anger when her expectations were not met. At first, she watched Monica carefully, interpreting the young bride's quiet behavior as weakness. In Roman households, strength often revealed itself through loud certainty and visible control. Monica's restraint appeared unusual, even suspicious. Yet time has a way of revealing what first impressions cannot see. Day after day, the older woman observed how Monica responded to criticism with calm words and steady patience. The expected arguments never arrived. Gradually, curiosity replaced suspicion. Why did this young woman refuse to answer insult with insult? Why did she remain composed even when treated unfairly? These quiet questions began to settle into the mind of the household matron. Monica did not attempt to persuade her with arguments. She continued the same rhythm of daily life: respectful speech, careful service, and quiet dignity. Her conduct created a witness that no lecture could have achieved. One small change led to another. The harsh remarks became less frequent. The sharp looks softened. Slowly, almost unnoticed, the older woman began to defend Monica when others criticized her patience. Neighbors who had once heard stories of tension within the house began to hear something different. The relationship between the two women had shifted. The fierce authority that once challenged Monica now showed signs of respect. In this quiet transformation, Monica saw a sign of hope. The household that once seemed ruled entirely by anger had begun to change. Not through confrontation, but through patient character. One hardened heart had slowly begun to soften. As the years passed, Monica's life within her marriage began to take on a deeper meaning. What had once been simple endurance slowly became something greater. A living witness carried not through arguments, but through the quiet authority of character. In a world where honor was often defended with sharp words and forceful pride, Monica chose a path that seemed almost invisible. She allowed her conduct, her patience, and her consistency to speak in ways that no speech could have accomplished. Patricius watched this carefully, though he rarely admitted it. He expected anger in return for his temper, resistance in response to his authority. Yet Monica answered conflict with composure, and irritation with a restraint that slowly unsettled his assumptions. Her faith never appeared as a challenge to his authority. She did not attempt to dominate the spiritual direction of the house. Instead, she lived her belief in a manner that made it difficult to dismiss, because it was expressed in daily acts of dignity and care. The servants of the household noticed the difference first. They observed how Monica treated everyone with fairness and respect, regardless of their position. Her presence created an atmosphere that felt calmer, more ordered. Even when tensions rose, neighbors began speaking quietly of the unusual harmony she carried within herself. Many marriages in Tagaste were loud with conflict, yet Monica's response to hardship seemed to follow a different pattern, one that puzzled those who expected confrontation. Gradually, Patricius himself began to recognize this silent influence. The patience he had once mistaken for weakness revealed a deeper strength. Monica's life was becoming something he could not easily explain, yet could not ignore either. Thus her witness grew, not through debate or persuasion, but through steady presence. In the ordinary rhythm of daily life, Monica's faith began to shape the household itself, quietly demonstrating that the most persuasive testimony is often a life faithfully lived. As Monica's quiet witness continued to shape the atmosphere of their home, Patricius found himself caught in an unexpected tension. The woman he had once regarded with casual tolerance now stood before him as a presence both familiar and strangely difficult to understand. At times, he reacted with irritation. Monica's calm composure during his moments of anger unsettled him. It challenged the natural order he had always known, where authority was confirmed by forceful words and obedience followed without quiet resistance. Yet in other moments, Patricius showed a different response. He could not deny that his wife possessed a rare steadiness. While many households in Tagaste were shaken by constant conflict, his own home had slowly become more stable under her patient influence. This contradiction created a divided attitude within him. He did not share Monica's Christian faith, and the belief she held still appeared strange to his Roman sensibilities. Yet he found himself increasingly respecting the character that faith had produced in her. When neighbors spoke of Monica's wisdom and patience, Patricius listened with a mixture of pride and confusion. Her reputation reflected honor upon the household, yet it also reminded him that her strength came from a belief he did not yet accept. Sometimes he mocked the practices of the Christian community, dismissing them as the peculiar customs of a small and stubborn sect. At other times, he allowed Monica to follow her devotions freely, recognizing that her faith had never disrupted the harmony of the home. Thus Patricius lived between resistance and admiration. His temper still flared, his pride still guarded the traditions of Rome. Yet the steady character of his wife continued to press quietly upon his conscience. In that tension, a slow change was beginning. Patricius had not yet embraced Monica's faith, but the life she lived had planted a question in his mind, a question that would grow steadily in the years to come. By the passing of years, something subtle began to shift within the household of Patricius. The change did not arrive with dramatic arguments or sudden revelations. Instead, it moved quietly through the rhythms of daily life, almost unnoticed by those living inside its slow transformation. The same house that had once echoed with frequent anger now experienced longer stretches of calm. Patricius' temper had not vanished, yet its storms seemed less frequent, as though the atmosphere itself had gradually grown less welcoming to rage. Servants who had once stepped cautiously through tense rooms now worked with greater ease. Conversations carried less sharpness. The quiet order Monica had cultivated through patience had slowly begun to influence the tone of the household. Even Patricius's mother, once quick to criticize, now defended Monica when disputes arose. Her earlier suspicion had given way to a guarded admiration. The young bride she had once judged weak had revealed a strength that commanded respect. Patricius himself began noticing these shifts, though he rarely spoke of them openly. The peace that had grown inside his home could not easily be explained by Roman customs or household discipline alone. At times he watched Monica move through the house with quiet efficiency, caring for the family and maintaining calm even in moments of tension. Something about her presence seemed to steady the entire environment around her. What Patricius could not yet name was the deeper force shaping these changes. The Christian faith he had once dismissed was not confronting him through argument. Instead, it was revealing itself through the patient life of the woman beside him. Thus, the transformation of the house continued invisibly. No dramatic moment announced it. Yet beneath ordinary routines, hearts were slowly softening. Habits were quietly shifting, and the influence of Monica's steady faith was reshaping the world within those walls. As the years advanced, Patricius could no longer ignore the quiet influence that had settled over his household. The patience he once regarded as weakness had proven itself stronger than anger. Slowly, the questions Monica's life had planted began stirring within his own conscience. He had watched her endure storms that would have broken many others. She had answered harshness with restraint, pride with humility, and tension with steady composure. Such conduct forced Patricius to reconsider the faith he had long dismissed as impractical. Age and experience also played their part. The ambitions that once dominated his thoughts began to lose their intensity. Public success and Roman honor no longer seemed as permanent or satisfying as they once had in his younger years. Meanwhile, Monica continued her quiet discipline of prayer. She did not pressure him with arguments or constant persuasion. Instead, she trusted that the same patience that had slowly softened the household might one day reach the heart of her husband as well. Gradually, Patricius's resistance weakened. The example before him could no longer be explained away as mere personality or good manners. Something deeper seemed to shape Monica's character, something that gave her a strength he himself lacked. The turning point did not arrive with dramatic spectacle. Rather, it appeared as a quiet realization growing within him. The recognition that the faith guiding his wife's life might hold a truth he had long overlooked. Before the end of his life approached, Patricius allowed that truth to take root. The man who had once stood firmly within the pagan traditions of Rome accepted the Christian faith that Monica had carried silently for so many years. For Monica, this moment answered prayers she had whispered through countless nights. The long struggle within her marriage had not been in vain. Patricius' conversion revealed a truth she had trusted from the beginning. Patient faith can reshape even the hardest hearts. Among the children growing within Monica's household, Augustine soon revealed a mind unlike the others. From an early age, he displayed an unusual curiosity, absorbing language, ideas, and arguments with remarkable speed, as though his thoughts were constantly reaching beyond the limits of ordinary instruction. Teachers in Tagaste quickly recognized this sharp intelligence. Augustine did not merely memorize lessons. He questioned them. He enjoyed the challenge of rhetoric, the beauty of language, and the thrill of intellectual debate that defined Roman education. To his father Patricius, such talent appeared as a promise of worldly success. In the Roman world, mastery of rhetoric and learning could open doors to public honor and advancement. Augustine's brilliance seemed to place that future within reach. Monica also saw the extraordinary potential within her son. Yet her hopes were shaped by a different vision. She longed not only for his intellectual achievement, but for a life guided by faith and moral strength. Augustine, however, possessed a restless spirit that resisted easy guidance. His mind loved exploration and challenge, but his heart was drawn toward the pleasures and ambitions that Roman culture celebrated. As he grew older, that restless curiosity sometimes turned into impatience with restraint. Augustine enjoyed admiration, debate, and the excitement of new ideas, often pushing against the boundaries his mother quietly hoped he would respect. Monica watched this development with a mixture of pride and concern. She recognized the gift her son carried, but she also sensed the danger within such brilliance when it moved without spiritual direction. Thus, a new struggle began within the family. While Monica had once prayed for the transformation of her husband's heart, she now found herself praying with equal urgency for her son, a young man whose extraordinary mind might one day shape history, for good or for ruin. When Augustine reached the age for advanced study, the path before him led away from the quiet town of Tagaste toward the vibrant and restless city of Carthage. For a young mind hungry for knowledge, Carthage promised opportunity, reputation, and intellectual excitement. Carthage was one of the great cities of Roman North Africa, alive with commerce, culture, and ambition. Its theaters, schools of rhetoric, and crowded streets formed a world far removed from the careful discipline of Augustine's childhood home. At first, Augustine entered this environment with enthusiasm for learning. He pursued rhetoric with passion, mastering the art of persuasive speech and intellectual argument. His brilliance quickly attracted attention among students and teachers alike. Yet Carthage also carried dangers for a young man whose desires were not yet disciplined. The city offered pleasures as eagerly as it offered knowledge. Entertainment, ambition, and indulgence mingled freely within its lively atmosphere. Augustine later described those years with painful honesty. His heart, restless and searching, became drawn toward passions that distracted him from the deeper questions of truth and faith his mother had hoped he would pursue. Instead of finding clarity, Augustine found confusion. His intellect sharpened, but his life grew increasingly divided between the pursuit of knowledge and the attractions of worldly pleasure that surrounded him in the city. Far away in Tagaste, Monica sensed this change, even without witnessing it directly. News of Augustine's choices reached her slowly. carried by travelers in letters that hinted at a growing distance between her hopes and her son's path. Thus, Carthage became the stage of Augustine's first great fall. The city that promised intellectual greatness also became the place where his life began to drift further from the faith his mother had quietly planted in his earliest years. In the restless search for truth that marked his years in Carthage, Augustine encountered ideas that seemed to promise clarity. Among them was a movement known as Manichaeism, a religion that claimed to explain the great conflict between good and evil in the universe. Manichaeism taught that the world itself was divided between two opposing powers, light and darkness. According to its teachers, human existence was caught within this cosmic struggle, and salvation meant escaping the prison of material existence. To Augustine's questioning mind, these ideas appeared sophisticated and intellectually satisfying. They offered explanations for suffering and moral confusion that seemed more systematic than the faith he had inherited as a child. For nearly 9 years, Augustine became closely attached to this teaching. He believed he had discovered a deeper philosophical understanding of the universe, one that seemed to harmonize reason, morality, and cosmic order. Yet the attraction of Manichaeism also created a painful divide between Augustine and his mother. Monica recognized immediately that this path moved far from the Christian faith she had prayed for him to embrace. When Augustine returned home and began speaking openly about these beliefs, Monica felt the weight of a new sorrow. The brilliant son she loved had not merely wandered into youthful distraction. He had embraced a worldview that rejected the faith she cherished. Her response was not quiet acceptance. For a time, Monica refused to welcome Augustine at her table, unable to pretend that such a spiritual distance did not matter. The tension between mother and son deepened. Thus, Augustine's search for truth led him into a path that seemed, at least for a time, to move further from the God his mother served. Yet even in this moment of division, the story of their family had not yet reached its turning point. When Augustine returned home, carrying the confidence of his new philosophical convictions, the distance between mother and son could no longer remain hidden. The quiet harmony Monica had long struggled to maintain within the household suddenly faced its most painful test. Augustine spoke passionately about the teachings he had embraced. With the bold certainty of youth and intellectual pride, he explained the ideas of Manichaeism as if he had finally uncovered the deeper structure of the universe itself. To Augustine, these arguments felt liberating. He believed he had moved beyond what he considered the simplicity of his childhood faith. Reason and philosophy, he thought, had led him into a more enlightened understanding of reality. For Monica, however, each of these conversations struck her heart with quiet grief. The son she had prayed for since his infancy now spoke of beliefs that denied the very foundation of the faith she had hoped would guide his life. The tension between them finally reached a breaking point. Unable to pretend that such differences were harmless, Monica made a painful decision. She refused to allow Augustine to share the family table while he openly defended teachings she believed were dangerously misleading. This decision was not born from anger, but from a wounded love. Monica feared that silent acceptance might appear as approval, and she could not bear the thought that her son's spiritual path might drift even further from the truth she cherished. Augustine, proud and confident in his new philosophy, did not yet understand the depth of his mother's sorrow. To him, her reaction seemed excessive, perhaps even unreasonable. Thus, the first great conflict between them emerged. Not a quarrel of harsh words, but a deeper struggle between a mother's faith and a son's restless search for truth. The bond between them remained strong, yet it had entered a season of painful division. After their painful confrontation, the relationship between Monica and Augustine entered a colder, and more uncertain season. The affection that once flowed naturally between mother and son was now overshadowed by a growing distance neither of them fully understood how to cross. Augustine continued pursuing his studies and philosophical ambitions, convinced that intellectual freedom required independence from the beliefs of his childhood. In his mind, the path he had chosen was one of courage and enlightenment rather than rebellion. Monica watched this separation unfold with quiet sorrow. She had always known that her son possessed a powerful mind, but she now feared that brilliance without spiritual direction might lead him far from the truth she had spent her life defending. Their conversations became fewer and more cautious. When they spoke, the topics that once united them now exposed the widening gap between Augustine's philosophical confidence and Monica's steadfast Christian faith. Augustine's growing reputation as a gifted teacher and thinker also deepened the divide. His confidence in his intellectual achievements strengthened his belief that his new ideas had elevated him beyond the religious convictions of his youth. For Monica, however, every report of her son's success carried a mixture of pride and anxiety. She admired his abilities, yet she feared that the path he walked might lead him into a deeper spiritual darkness. Still, Monica did not abandon hope. Even as Augustine's life seemed to move further away from her faith, she continued praying with the same persistence that had shaped the earlier struggles of her marriage. Thus, the distance between them grew, not only in belief, but soon in geography as well. Augustine's restless ambition would soon carry him beyond Tagaste, leaving Monica to face a new chapter of waiting, prayer, and uncertain hope. During those heavy months, when Augustine's distance weighed deeply upon her heart, Monica carried a sorrow that seemed almost unbearable. Her prayers had grown more urgent, yet the path of her son appeared to move steadily further from the faith she cherished. It was during this season of grief that a story later preserved in Christian tradition emerged, a moment that would become deeply associated with Monica's long struggle of prayer. According to these accounts, she experienced a dream that brought unexpected comfort. In the dream, Monica saw herself standing upon a wooden rule or measuring beam, weeping in sorrow for the path her son had chosen. The image reflected the anguish she carried daily, watching Augustine drift further from the beliefs she held sacred. Then, as the story is told, a radiant figure appeared beside her. Seeing her tears, the figure asked why she wept so bitterly. Monica explained her grief over Augustine, fearing that the son she loved might never return to the truth she believed. The figure then spoke words that changed the meaning of the dream. Monica was told to look carefully and see where she herself stood. When she looked again, Augustine appeared standing beside her on the same rule. Monica interpreted the dream as a sign that her son would one day stand where she stood in faith. The vision did not explain how such a change might occur, nor when it might come, but it planted a small yet powerful seed of hope. Augustine himself later recorded this dream in his famous work, Confessions, though he remembered it with a mixture of reflection and humility. Whether seen as divine reassurance or the expression of a grieving mother's hope, the story endured through Christian memory. For Monica, the dream did not end her struggle. Augustine's path had not yet changed, but in the quiet chambers of her heart, a fragile conviction began to grow that the story of her son had not yet reached its final chapter. Despite the fragile hope stirred by her dream, Monica's sorrow did not disappear. Augustine's life still seemed firmly rooted in ideas that rejected the faith she held dear. Each passing year deepened her longing for a sign that her prayers were not in vain. In this period of grief, Monica sought counsel from a respected bishop within the Christian community. She approached him not with intellectual questions, but with the raw anguish of a mother whose son seemed lost to beliefs she feared would mislead him. She spoke of Augustine's brilliance, his stubborn pride, and the philosophical system that had captivated his mind. Monica pleaded with the bishop to speak with her son, hoping that a voice of spiritual authority might persuade him to reconsider his path. The bishop listened patiently, but refused the request. He explained that Augustine was still intoxicated with the excitement of his new ideas. Direct argument, he believed, would only harden the young man's confidence rather than soften it. Seeing Monica's deep distress, the bishop offered a different kind of reassurance. He encouraged her not to lose heart, reminding her that the persistence of her prayers carried a power she might not yet fully see. Then he spoke words that would echo through Christian history. With quiet conviction, he told her, "Go in peace. It cannot be that the child of those tears should perish." Those words did not instantly change Augustine's life, but they gave Monica a renewed strength to continue. They affirmed her belief that the years of prayer and sorrow she carried for her son were not unnoticed before God. Thus, Monica left the bishop's presence with a heart both wounded and strengthened. The struggle was far from over, yet the promise contained in those simple words would sustain her through the long years still ahead. As Augustine's reputation as a teacher of rhetoric grew, his ambitions began reaching beyond the provincial limits of Tagaste. The restless energy that had long shaped his mind now pushed him toward a larger stage where recognition and opportunity seemed far greater. Rome, the heart of the empire, stood as the natural destination for such aspirations. Its schools attracted scholars and students from across the Roman world, and its intellectual life promised both prestige and advancement for those gifted in the art of persuasion. Yet Augustine knew that leaving for Rome would not be easy. Monica had become increasingly watchful, fearing that greater independence might lead him further away from the faith she had prayed for him to rediscover. Determined to follow his own path, Augustine chose a difficult solution. He decided to leave secretly. Under the cover of ordinary travel preparations, he arranged his departure while allowing his mother to believe that he would soon return. Monica accompanied him to the harbor, believing she was simply seeing him off for a short journey. Her heart carried both concern and hope, trusting that the bond between them would soon bring him back. But during the night, while Monica remained praying in a nearby chapel, Augustine quietly boarded the ship bound for Rome. When the vessel finally departed the harbor, he left behind not only his homeland, but also the anxious mother who had followed him with such devotion. When Monica realized what had happened, the pain of that moment struck deeply. The son she loved had chosen distance rather than reconciliation, leaving her to face the vast uncertainty of his future alone. Thus, Augustine's journey toward Rome began with a quiet act of escape. Yet even as the ship carried him across the Mediterranean, another journey continued unseen. The persistent prayers of a mother who refused to abandon hope. When the first shock of Augustine's departure settled into quiet grief, Monica faced a decision that would define the next chapter of her life. She could remain in Tagaste and wait for news, or she could follow the son whose path had led him across the sea. For many mothers in her world, such a journey would have seemed impossible. Travel across the Mediterranean was dangerous, unpredictable, and exhausting. Yet Monica's love and determination overcame the fears that might have restrained a more cautious heart. She knew that Augustine had gone to Rome, the immense and crowded capital of the empire. Somewhere within that vast city of scholars, officials, merchants, and travelers, her brilliant yet troubled son was continuing his restless search for meaning. Monica prepared herself for the long voyage with a quiet resolve. The sea between Africa and Italy had carried armies, traders, and pilgrims for centuries. Now, it would carry a mother whose journey was guided not by ambition, but by prayer. The ship that bore her northward moved slowly across the Mediterranean waters. As the coastline of Africa faded behind her, Monica carried only a few possessions and a heart filled with hope that had already endured years of disappointment. Throughout the journey, she continued the discipline that had shaped her life. She prayed for Augustine's protection, for the softening of his heart, and for the unseen guidance of God in a story whose direction she could not yet understand. Travelers on the ship likely saw only a quiet woman among many others crossing the sea. Few could have guessed the weight of the story she carried, the years of tears, patience, and faith that had brought her to this moment. Thus, Monica followed the path of her son across the waters of the Mediterranean. The distance between them had grown wider than ever, yet her determination revealed a truth that would shape the rest of their story. A mother's hope can travel further than any ship. When Monica finally reached the immense city of Rome, she entered a world far larger and more complicated than the quiet streets of Tagaste. The capital of the empire stretched endlessly before her, crowded with travelers, scholars, merchants, and restless ambition. Rome was a city where a person could easily disappear among its countless neighborhoods and busy marketplaces. For a mother searching for one man among so many strangers, the task before Monica seemed almost impossible. Augustine, meanwhile, had already begun building a new life within the city's intellectual circles. His reputation as a gifted teacher of rhetoric continued to grow, attracting students who admired his sharp mind and confident arguments. Yet the very brilliance that brought Augustine's success also deepened the distance between him and his mother's hopes. His philosophical pursuits kept him moving through the networks of scholars and teachers who filled the Roman schools. Monica searched patiently, gathering small fragments of information from travelers and acquaintances. Each rumor offered a possible lead, yet Rome's immense size seemed to swallow every trace just as quickly as it appeared. In time, she discovered a painful truth. Augustine had already left Rome again, seeking greater opportunity in the northern city of Milan, where new academic prospects had opened before him. The realization struck with quiet disappointment. After crossing the Mediterranean in hope of finding her son, Monica now faced the fact that he had moved even further away before she could reach him. Yet, this new distance did not end her pursuit. Instead, it deepened her resolve. The story between Monica and Augustine was not finished in Rome, and the path that had already carried her across the sea would soon lead her further still. When Monica learned that Augustine had already left Rome, the news carried a sharp sting of disappointment. The long journey she had taken across the Mediterranean seemed suddenly incomplete, as if the path she followed kept extending just beyond her reach. Yet this new distance did not weaken her determination. Augustine had traveled north to Milan, a city that had become one of the political and intellectual centers of the Western Roman Empire. If her son had gone there, Monica resolved to follow. The road to Milan was long and demanding. Travelers crossed plains, rivers, and mountain passes that connected the great cities of the empire. For Monica, the journey was not driven by ambition or commerce, but by the quiet persistence of maternal hope. Along these roads, she likely encountered soldiers, traders, and pilgrims moving through the empire's vast network of routes. Few would have known that among them walked a mother whose entire journey was shaped by years of prayer. for one wandering son. Meanwhile, Augustine had begun establishing himself in Milan as a respected teacher of rhetoric. The city offered prestige and opportunity, and its intellectual circles welcomed his brilliant arguments and confident presence. Yet beneath Augustine's growing success, the deeper questions of his life had not disappeared. His mind continued searching for truth, even as his career advanced within the academic life of the empire. Monica's journey toward Milan carried more than determination. It carried the conviction that the story unfolding between her faith and her son's restless mind had not yet reached its final turning point. Thus, the road continued northward, carrying Monica steadily closer to the city where Augustine now lived. Neither of them yet understood that Milan would soon become the place where their long struggle would begin to change forever. When Monica finally arrived in Milan, the city revealed a different atmosphere from the places she had known before. It was not only a political center of the empire, but also a place where Christian thought had begun to grow with unusual strength. At the heart of this spiritual influence stood Bishop Ambrose, a man respected not only for his authority within the church, but also for his intellectual brilliance and powerful preaching. His reputation had spread far beyond the city itself. Monica soon encountered the Christian community of Milan and began attending the gatherings where Ambrose spoke. From the first time she heard his voice, she recognized something different, a depth of understanding that united faith with disciplined thought. Ambrose preached the scriptures with a clarity that addressed both the mind and the heart. His explanations showed that Christian belief could withstand serious intellectual examination, answering the philosophical questions that troubled many thoughtful listeners. For Monica, this discovery awakened a new hope. Augustine had always been drawn to intellectual arguments and refined language. Here in Milan stood a bishop capable of speaking to precisely that kind of restless mind. She began speaking with Ambrose about her son, explaining Augustine's brilliance, his fascination with Manichaeism, and the long years of prayer she had carried for him. Ambrose listened carefully, recognizing both the struggle and the possibility hidden within Augustine's story. Though he did not immediately confront Augustine directly, Ambrose welcomed the young rhetorician into his circle of listeners. Augustine himself soon began attending the bishop's sermons, initially drawn more by their eloquence than by their spiritual meaning. Thus, in the great city of Milan, two powerful influences quietly moved toward each other: the searching intellect of Augustine and the thoughtful preaching of Ambrose. Between them stood the patient faith of Monica, waiting for the moment when these paths might finally meet. In Milan, Augustine's life appeared successful to those who watched from the outside. He held a respected position as a teacher of rhetoric, surrounded by students who admired his skill with language and argument. Yet beneath this outward confidence, a quiet struggle had begun. Listening to Ambrose's sermons first attracted Augustine's intellect rather than his faith. The bishop's eloquence and disciplined reasoning fascinated him. For the first time, Augustine encountered a form of Christianity that did not seem intellectually weak or simplistic. This discovery unsettled assumptions he had carried for years. The philosophical system of Manichaeism, once so convincing to him, now began to reveal gaps and contradictions that his questioning mind could no longer easily ignore. Augustine found himself standing between two worlds. On one side stood the beliefs he had defended passionately for nearly a decade. On the other side emerged a growing awareness that the Christian tradition might possess deeper wisdom than he had once imagined. The conflict was not merely intellectual. Augustine's life itself had become divided between his desire for truth and the habits and ambitions that still held him firmly within the pleasures and distractions of the world around him. His mind searched for certainty, yet his heart resisted surrender. The idea of change carried a weight he was not yet prepared to bear. Accepting the truth would require more than argument. It would require a transformation of life. Meanwhile, Monica watched this internal struggle unfold with quiet hope. She could not see the full battle within Augustine's thoughts, but she sensed that something had begun to shift beneath the surface of his confident exterior. Thus, Milan became the stage for Augustine's deepest conflict. The brilliance of his intellect had led him through many philosophies. Yet now he faced a question far more personal: whether he was ready to follow the truth wherever it might lead. By the time Augustine had spent several years in Milan, the battle within him had grown impossible to ignore. The confidence that once sustained his philosophical arguments had begun to erode, replaced by a restless awareness that his search for truth had not yet reached its destination. Ambrose's sermons continued shaping his understanding of Scripture. Augustine listened carefully as difficult passages of the Bible were explained with intellectual depth and symbolic insight. The faith he had once dismissed as naive now appeared far more profound than he had imagined. At the same time, Augustine found himself reading the works of Christian thinkers who approached faith with disciplined reasoning. These writings challenged the assumptions that had kept him tied to Manichaeism and opened new possibilities within his philosophical search. Yet the obstacle he faced was no longer only intellectual. Augustine had begun to recognize that the truth he was approaching demanded more than agreement of the mind. It required a change of life that frightened him. Habits, ambitions, and attachments held him back. He feared the cost of surrendering his old identity, the reputation he had built, and the pleasures that had long shaped his daily existence. Thus, Augustine found himself standing at the threshold of transformation. His mind had nearly crossed the boundary of belief, yet his will hesitated, pulled in opposite directions by conviction and resistance. Monica, watching from a distance yet praying with unwavering persistence, sensed that the long years of struggle were approaching a decisive moment. The story she had carried in prayer seemed to be moving toward its long-awaited turning point. The stage was now set for a decision that would alter not only Augustine's life, but the future of Christian thought itself. The brilliant teacher of rhetoric stood at the edge of change, facing a truth that could no longer be easily dismissed. The conflict within Augustine eventually reached a point where it could no longer remain hidden beneath intellectual arguments. The questions that had once been philosophical had become painfully personal. He was no longer debating ideas. He was confronting the direction of his own life. For years he had pursued truth through philosophy, rhetoric, and complex theories about the nature of the universe. Yet none of those paths had given him the peace he expected. The deeper he searched, the more restless his heart became. Augustine later described this struggle with striking honesty. His mind had begun to recognize the truth of Christian teaching, yet his will remained divided. He desired change, but he also feared the loss of the life he had grown accustomed to. This inner battle intensified in Milan as he listened to the teachings of Ambrose and reflected on the Scriptures. Each new insight brought him closer to conviction. Yet the final step toward surrender still felt painfully difficult. Friends and companions observed that Augustine had grown quieter and more thoughtful. The confident teacher who once spoke with easy certainty now carried the weight of decisions that could reshape his entire future. Monica continued praying with the same patient faith that had guided her through earlier struggles. She did not attempt to force the moment, trusting that the transformation of a human heart cannot be rushed. Inside Augustine's soul, however, The pressure was reaching its peak. The arguments that once protected his resistance were collapsing one by one, leaving him exposed before the truth he could no longer ignore. Thus, the long search approached its breaking point. Augustine stood at the threshold where intellectual conviction would soon demand a personal response, a moment that would determine whether his restless mind would finally find the peace it had pursued for so long. One day in Milan, overwhelmed by the turmoil inside his soul, Augustine withdrew into a quiet garden. The weight of his long struggle pressed heavily upon him. For years his mind had searched for truth, yet his heart now trembled before the change that truth required. He later described how emotion overcame him in that moment. Tears flowed freely as he wrestled with the divided desires within him, one part longing for a new life, the other clinging to familiar habits that had shaped his past. The garden offered silence, but Augustine's thoughts were anything but calm. His conscience pressed against him with increasing urgency. He felt caught between the person he had been and the person he sensed he was now called to become. Then, in the midst of this inner storm, Augustine heard a voice from nearby. It sounded like the song of a child repeating a simple phrase: "Take and read. Take and read." The words struck him with sudden clarity. Interpreting them as a divine invitation, Augustine reached for a copy of the scriptures that lay nearby. With trembling hands, he opened the text and began to read. His eyes fell upon a passage from the writings of the Apostle Paul, calling believers to abandon the works of darkness and to clothe themselves with a new life shaped by Christ. In that instant, the struggle within him collapsed. Augustine later wrote that a light of peace flooded his heart, dissolving the doubts and resistance that had bound him for so many years. Thus, in the quiet of a garden far from the town of his childhood, the long journey of Augustine's searching mind finally reached its turning point. The restless seeker who had pursued truth through many paths had now chosen a different road. After the decisive moment in the garden, Augustine's life moved steadily toward the transformation he had long resisted. The intellectual struggle that had dominated his mind for years had finally yielded to conviction, and he began preparing openly for entry into the Christian faith. Under the guidance of Bishop Ambrose in Milan, Augustine joined others who were being instructed in the teachings of the Church. This period of preparation allowed him to reflect deeply on the beliefs he had once rejected and now embraced with growing clarity. For Monica, watching these events unfold felt almost beyond belief. The years of prayer, tears, and patient waiting that had defined her life were now revealing their long-awaited answer in the quiet transformation of her son. In the year 387, during the celebration of Easter, Augustine stood among those ready to receive baptism. The ceremony took place in the church dedicated to St. John the Baptist in Milan, where Ambrose himself presided over the sacred rite. As Augustine stepped into the waters of baptism, the symbolic meaning of the moment reached far beyond the ritual itself. The restless seeker who had wandered through many philosophies was publicly committing his life to the faith he had once resisted. The event carried profound emotional weight for Monica. The son whose path had caused her so many years of sorrow now stood beside her as a new believer, entering the Christian community she had long prayed he would one day join. For Augustine, baptism marked not the end of his intellectual journey, but the beginning of a new one. The brilliant mind that once defended competing philosophies would soon turn its strength toward exploring and defending Christian truth. Thus, the waters of Milan became the threshold of a new chapter in Augustine's life. The long conflict between doubt and faith had reached its resolution, and the story that began with a mother's tears now opened into a future shaped by grace. For many years, Monica had carried a burden that few around her could fully understand. The struggles of her marriage, the long sorrow over Augustine's wandering, and the endless discipline of prayer had shaped the deepest rhythms of her life. Now, standing beside her son after his baptism, Monica felt a quiet fulfillment she had scarcely allowed herself to imagine. The transformation she had hoped for through countless nights of prayer had finally become visible before her eyes. Augustine himself later reflected on this moment with deep gratitude. He understood that his mother's patience had not been passive resignation, but a determined faith that refused to surrender even when the years seemed to bring no visible change. The tension that had once defined their relationship now gave way to a new harmony. Conversations that had once ended in disagreement now carried the shared language of faith that Monica had long desired. For the first time in many years, Monica's prayers were no longer driven by fear or grief. The long struggle that had filled her heart with anxious hope had reached a moment of peaceful completion. Yet her joy was not triumphant or dramatic. It was quieter, deeper, the kind of peace that grows slowly after a long storm has finally passed. Monica understood that the story of her life had never been only about suffering. It had been about perseverance, about trusting that God could shape events even when the path forward seemed hidden. In this new season of calm, Monica's heart finally rested. The son she had followed with tears and prayers now walked beside her in faith, and the years of waiting had revealed their purpose. Not long after the conversation in Ostia, Monica's strength began to fade. The long years of travel, prayer, and quiet endurance had shaped her life deeply, and now her body seemed to recognize that the work entrusted to her had finally reached its completion. She fell ill while still staying in the port city, resting in a lodging place near the harbor where ships prepared to sail across the Mediterranean. The journey back to Africa, once so carefully planned, would never take place. Augustine remained beside her during those final days, accompanied by his brother Navigius and close friends. The atmosphere around Monica's bedside was not filled with panic, but with a strange mixture of sorrow and peaceful acceptance. When she sensed that death was approaching, Monica spoke calmly to her sons. Her words reflected the quiet confidence that had guided her entire life, revealing a heart no longer burdened by unfinished hopes. "Son," she said to Augustine, "nothing in this world now gives me delight. I do not know why I am still here or what I have left to do. All my hopes in this life have now been fulfilled." The statement carried a profound meaning. For Monica, the central longing of her life had always been the spiritual future of her son. Seeing Augustine embrace the Christian faith had brought her the peace she had prayed for through so many years. Soon afterward, in the year 387, Monica quietly passed away in Ostia. The mother whose tears and patience had shaped one of history's most influential Christian thinkers departed without spectacle, leaving behind a legacy of faith that would echo through centuries. Her body was buried there in Ostia, near the shore where the river meets the sea. Yet the true measure of her life was not the place of her burial, but the transformation she had helped bring about in the heart of her son. From the quiet town of Tagaste to the distant harbor of Ostia, Monica's life unfolded without the power or recognition that usually marks historical figures. She held no political office, commanded no armies, and wrote no famous books that would shape generations. Yet within the hidden spaces of ordinary life, her influence grew with extraordinary strength. Through patience, prayer, and unwavering hope, she shaped a story whose consequences would extend far beyond the walls of her own household. The restless son she had followed with tears and determination did not remain merely a converted believer. Augustine would later become one of the most influential Christian thinkers in history, shaping theology, philosophy, and spiritual reflection for centuries to come. His writings would guide the intellectual life of the Church, influencing scholars, pastors, and believers across continents and generations. Ideas first wrestled with in his troubled youth would become the foundation of profound Christian thought. Behind that intellectual legacy stood the quiet perseverance of a mother who refused to abandon hope. Monica's life revealed that the most powerful transformations in history often begin in places the world considers small and insignificant. Her story carries a deeper lesson about the mysterious influence of faith lived patiently over time. The prayers offered in solitude, the endurance shown in difficult relationships, and the hope carried through years of uncertainty can shape events far beyond what anyone can see. For countless parents who have watched loved ones wander far from faith or truth, Monica's life continues to speak across the centuries. Her tears remind them that the story of a human soul is rarely finished as quickly as fear might suggest. Thus, the legacy of Monica endures not in monuments or power, but in the quiet testimony of a life faithfully lived. Through patience, courage, and persistent prayer, a mother's love helped shape a mind that would change the course of Christian history.